God's Word. Join with me as we pick it up in Mark chapter 5, starting in verse 21. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. There was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment, for she said, "If I touch even his garments, I'll be made well." Immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" His disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." They laughed at him, but he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years old of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. Two stories for the price of one. That's what we got going on. Both have an element of faith. Right? Jairus, this ruler, implored Jesus to come because his daughter is getting worse and is dying, and he needs Jesus to intervene. That's a great picture. As parents with families or with kids, nephews or nieces or children that are out there, we should be praying. Not just when they're deathly sick, but regularly and always. But knowing who to pray to and what to pray about, that's key. Jairus comes with limited understanding, perhaps, and yet he comes to Jesus, imploring him, believing that if he comes and lays his hands, his daughter will be made well. It's not that we don't believe that. I think we do. But we're not as desperate, maybe. Not as desperate as that woman, for sure. In the midst of the great crowd, pressed in, not because there was something magical about the garments of Jesus, but because she had faith that in that act of faith, she'd be made well. And Jesus knew that something had happened, knew that power had come out of him, to the chagrin of the disciples who were like, look at the crowd, really. He was able to then speak to her, and notice what he does. He calls her daughter. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Be healed of your disease. What a moment for a woman who has suffered for so long. Jesus took the time to see her. That may be above all, right? Yeah, she's healed completely of her disease, but her faith was rewarded. Jesus met her where she was at. She had nowhere else to go, nowhere else to turn. Finally, they get to Jairus' house, and the report is that his daughter is dead, so don't worry about it. And Jesus presses on. He had a bigger point in mind, and he's going to raise this little girl from the dead. Now, there's not a formula here for either of these, right? These aren't formulaic kind of ways to go about life, other than this. In whom are you trusting? We're in the midst of continual pandemic and fear. Are you trusting in the one who is the great physician above all else? Physically, emotionally, spiritually. Turn to Jesus by faith to make you well. Till next time, I'm going to buy the help.